Hey, why did you do that? Have you ever been asked that question? Why did you do that? Growing up, my mom asked that question hundreds of times. And I think about one particular time when I was in junior high school, Jefferson Junior High in Springfield, Illinois, and my mother was called to the principal's office to pick me up and take me home. Yeah, they decided to give me a couple days vacation from school. Now I know you're curious as to what I did. Well, I thought it would be funny to pull a fire extinguisher off the wall and squirt a friend. What happened was, once I activated that fire extinguisher, I couldn't turn it off. So I just hung it back on the wall. And all of a sudden, we have this white foam cascading down the stairs of Jefferson Junior High School. It was a really bad decision that cost me dearly. When my mom got me in the car, she pointed that finger at me and said, "I've taught you better than that. What were you thinking? Why did you do that?" And then she said, "Don't ever do that again." Paul, in Ephesians chapter 4, challenged the Ephesian believers to do the right thing. He challenged them not to go back and do the things that they did before they became a believer. So I want us to look at that tonight, and we'll notice in chapter 4 and verse number 17 that Paul warned them about their past. He warned them, he cautioned them about their past, and we read that in verse number 17. He said, "I affirm together with the Lord that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles walk." I affirm together. Jesus and I are on the same page, and we're telling you not to walk as the Gentiles walk. Now, this is not a suggestion. The original language really means a stern admonishment, as though Jesus himself was saying it. Paul is saying, I'm representing Jesus, and this is what he would say to you. Don't do that again. This is serious business. You see, they were being tempted to go back. They were being tempted to go back to their former way of life. And Paul reminded them of what their life looked like before Jesus transformed their life. You know, it's important for us to remember what life was like before we came to Christ, because it wasn't pretty. Now notice here that he refers to Gentiles. Gentiles are non-Jewish people who had no relationship with God. And the church at Ephesus was primarily made up of Gentile believers. And Gentile believers, or Gentiles, I should say, before they became believers, were really, pagan worshipers. They came out of a paganistic background. And we see here in verses 17 through 19, where Paul said they walked in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. So Paul really describes about 5 different characteristics of what their life was like before Jesus. And he's telling them, warning them, don't go back, don't do that again. He says futility of mind. Futility of mind means that we lack substance or usefulness. It's a mind filled with thoughts and beliefs that lead to absolutely nothing. Think about that. A mind filled with thoughts and beliefs that produce nothing and lead to nothing. It's kind of like a little child when you blow bubbles. A little child will run around and chase a bubble. And then he reaches out and grabs the bubble, and the bubble disappears. It's gone. Absolutely nothing. They have nothing in their hand. That's what futility of mind or futility of thinking is really about. And in Proverbs 23, I think it is verse number 7, Solomon reminds us that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So we have to understand that our behavior is a result of our thinking. You know the old saying, if you sow a thought, you reap an action. That's what it's all about. And Paul is saying when you were away from Christ, before you knew Christ, you operated in the futility of your mind. Then he talks about the darkness of understanding. A futile mind leads to a dark mind. And darkness is a metaphor for ignorance. It's a metaphor for being ignorant and not recognizing their empty life, not recognizing that God was God, not recognizing the truth of God's word, not recognizing really what was moral and immoral. Then he goes on to talk about that they were excluded from the life of God. In other words, they can't enjoy a relationship with God. They can't enjoy the abundant life that Jesus died to give them because of sin. The futility of their mind, darkening their understanding, causes them to be excluded from the life of God. Think about that. Then they went on and practiced sensuality. Practicing sensuality. In Ephesians chapter 4, in verse number 19, Paul says, "And they have become callous, having given themselves over to sensuality for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness." In other words, they had no moral compass. And we see this today, even in our society. And it's disturbing that people who don't know the Lord, people who aren't following Christ, are living in the futility of their mind, darkening their understanding because they're excluded from the life of God or excluded from God. Then they end up practicing sensuality. So the first three steps really lead to the fourth step. And here we see this in our society today with all the pornography and all the human trafficking and all of this garbage and this behavior is motivated by greed. It's disheartening, it's troubling, it's disturbing to see what people will do to make a dollar, how they exploit other people. We live in a society today that has lost their moral compass. And the result of all of these is because of the hardness of heart, because they had a hard heart. A destructive progression is shown here. Paul says, hey, this is the way you used to live. These are the things you used to do. This is how you used to think. A hard heart leads to this downward spiral. A hard heart doesn't acknowledge God. A hard heart doesn't want anything to do with God. A hard heart is not interested in listening about the Lord or obeying the Lord. And as Christians, we need to remember this. This is the way we used to think. These are the things that we used to do. And as Christians, that old guy has been crucified. We need to leave him in the grave. Don't let old thinking lead you to repeat old behavior or bad behavior. So Paul challenged their faith. Okay? He warned them about their past, and then he challenged their faith. Verse number 20. But you did not learn Christ in this way. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught in him, just as truth is in Jesus, that in reference to your former manner of life, that's what we just talked about, you lay aside the old self, which is being corrupted in accordance with the lust of deceit. And then in verse 24, and put on the new self, which is in the likeness of God, or in the likeness of God, has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. Notice Paul says, you learned Christ. You learned about him at the moment of salvation, but you continue to learn in him. You continue to learn and grow. Paul had spent hours, people had spent hours teaching these believers in Ephesus about Jesus Christ, how they should live, how they should follow Christ, a lifestyle that would honor God and invoke the blessings and favor of God. And he's telling them to walk in truth, walk in honor. Honor Jesus with your life. You know, it's like my mom said to me, John, I taught you better than that. You know the difference between right and wrong. Don't ever do that again. I want you and I expect you to do the right thing. So we'll talk more about this next week. We'll look at what this new life in Jesus looks like. In the meantime, I hope you have a blessed week. Hope you join us this Sunday, 9:15 and 11:15, right here at New Life. Have a great week.